My first tap teacher was my mother, and at 3 years old, I tagged along with my two older sisters to the Oakwood Dance Studio in Long Island, New York, and I strapped on my first pair of shiny leather tap shoes. And through observation, both visual and oral, I began to mimic, however crudely, the physical patterns in front of me. Before I learned to read, I learned to respond to rhythm. You see, tap dance is an oral tradition, and as such, it has long been transmitted from one generation to the next without the use of written language. Movement material is learned and passed on through a process affectionately referred to as stealing steps. Patterns and rhythms are reused and reinvented, often in a competitive spirit, engendering a kind of collective authorship. The repetition of movement allows for the maintenance of muscle memory, and the physical proximity between dancers was traditionally a crucial criterion for this process, particularly before the advent of film. Now, just as our technology has grown and blossomed, so too has the manner in which the tap tradition is accessed and passed down. For example, when I was 10 years old, my family purchased its first VCR, and my mother took me to the local library where we filled out a form, a request by hand for an interlibrary loan, and eventually succeeded in taking out a VHS tape of the movie Tap, starring Gregory Hines and Sammy Davis Jr. Now, this whole process took about a week. So we got the tape, brought it home, put it on, and wide-eyed I watched as legend after legend, men who at the time were in their 60s and 70s, just laid it all out on the floor. Marvelous dancers like Jimmy Slide, Arthur Duncan, Steve Condos, and my personal favorite, Bunny Briggs. And although I had not yet acquired the words to express it, I began to understand that this dance carried with it a culture and a story. And although I was dutifully honing my craft in the studio, I realized that there was more information in those steps than merely the mechanics they mandated. Now, 20 years have passed since that trip to the library. We now reside in the age of smartphones and social media. Tap dance may be recorded, produced, and published for global consumption entirely via the modern miracle of mobile devices. And that same film may be purchased and downloaded from iTunes onto a cell phone in a matter of minutes. Endless tutorials are available on YouTube for dancers seeking to decipher the mechanics of tap, making physical proximity between dancers no longer a prerequisite for learning steps. But can our digital interactions, often brief and impersonal, ever compare with person-to-person encounters and mentorship? And do the steps truly translate when divorced from the stories they carry? Tap is an American dance, and it's one of the oldest art forms to come out of the United States. Embedded in its beautifully intricate rhythms and footwork are the stories of African Americans forced into enslavement, attempting to hold on to their culture despite all efforts at its erasure. When slaves were banned from playing drums for fear they might communicate or coordinate rebellion, they began to transfer the rhythms to their bodies and their feet. And at the same time, tap carries with it the stories of Irish immigrants fleeing the Great Famine, facing prejudice abroad. For both of these groups, dancing a step may have momentarily alleviated some of their burden and helped to transport them in spirit back to the homes and the loved ones they had lost or left behind. If necessity is the mother of invention, well, it might also be said that adversity is the mother of tap dance. But beyond that, tap was and remains a means of expressing one's humanity, even when that humanity is vigorously denied. So, how do we continue to learn from the struggle that begat this beautiful art form while living in a newly accelerated age of transmission? And crucially, how do we harness the power of our technology to both innovate and honor our traditions? Well, the innovation has already begun. If you were a young, aspiring tap dancer in the 1930s, well, you may have waited years for one opportunity to see your idol perform live and hoped that when you left the theater, you retained even a tiny portion of what you saw. And if you were a young, aspiring tap dancer in the 1990s, you may have waited about a week for a movie loan from the library so you could study the steps of your idols. And if you are a young, aspiring tap dancer today, well, you have instant access to high-definition footage of many of your idols that you could convert into slow-motion playback, capturing nuance after nuance to then dissect and make your own. And in doing so, you are already honoring the tradition. Much more than a perfectly preserved relic of its origins, tap is a living tradition, and it is constantly endowed with new meaning as the practitioners of today absorb and interpret the collective contributions of past generations. And while we must still seek out person-to-person encounters, for they can never truly be replaced, our technology provides us with an opportunity to increase the impact of those encounters. Much like oral tradition, social media thrives on repetition and collective authorship. The more times a post is shared, the more amplified that story becomes. The more comments, the more perspectives. Ideas worth sharing. The TED platform is a rich example of this process. And so, in that spirit, if you will indulge me, I would like to share a story. In 2010, I traveled to Las Vegas, Nevada, with a troupe of tap dancers to perform in a televised benefit concert. And while dancing on national television for a venerable cause was an unforgettable experience, it was the afternoon leading up to that evening performance that left the brightest impression on my heart's memory. One of the most legendary and vibrant tap artists from the era of vaudeville and big bands, an idol of mine, was a man named Dr. Bunny Briggs. And at the time, Bunny was an 88-year-old national treasure residing in a nursing home in Vegas, occasionally visited by young tap dancers eager to hear his story. Well, for approximately 4 hours, I sat enraptured by the tales of a man who got into show business as a small child with the hopes of one day buying his single mother a house. And on the walls hung posters from bygone decades advertising headliners, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, and Bunny Briggs. On a table sat a small radio tuned to the local jazz station. The dust particles danced along, capturing the golden haze of the desert sun as it shone through the blinds. And behind the bright eyes and snow-white hair of this man lay the memories of Charleston steps and timeless characters like Bilbo Jangles Robinson and Jenny Lagan, Sandman Sims and Baby Lawrence. And through anecdotes and advice, he imparted wisdom about the joy of rhythm, the sting of racism, the nature of show business, and the importance of loving what you do. And before we departed, Bunny stood up in his plaid pajamas and his slippers, and he offered us a brief soft shoe. Gently supported by his walker. Four years later, Bunny passed away at the age of 92. And there was an immediate outpouring of tributes and stories, old footage and photographs, audio recordings, all shared on social media. A life remembered and celebrated. And suddenly, tap dancers from all corners of the globe were given a fuller picture of the man and his art. And when these dancers steal one of Bunny's steps, they are not merely repeating movement. They are incorporating their stories into his. And suddenly, our digital interactions are not so impersonal. They are imbued with greater meaning by our oral traditions, as they help to illustrate and clarify our common humanity. And I'll leave you with one final thought. It's a quote from my high school drama teacher, who said, "If science and technology have made it possible for us to live longer, it is the arts that make it worthwhile."